Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball podcast, everybody. Women's Tournament Edition. My name is Ashley Nicole Moss, and I have my girl, Terrika Foster Brasby, in the building. What's up, Terrika?
Hey, girl, I'm here. We survived.
Girl, listen, the first two rounds are in the books, and they gave us no shortage of talking points. We are going to try to dive into them all. But before we get into all of it, we'd love for you guys to go ahead and subscribe, share this with a friend who you know already loves or is trying to get into women's college basketball so you can see more of this kind of content. Now, let's dive into it right off the back. I mean, there's so much to get into, but I think the best thing we can go ahead and start with is the higher seeds, for the most part, won a lot of their matchups in the first two rounds. And, that seemed to be the trend throughout this past weekend. I mean, were you surprised by any of the lack of upsets this weekend?
I was not. I was surprised at the upset that we got. Like Louisville,
yes,
being out in within the first weekend. I did not see that coming, but I'm not surprised at the lack of upsets per se, just because that isn't something that's historically attributed to women's basketball. Like, you don't tend to see a lot of first round upsets in women's basketball. But what I can say is that there weren't many blowouts either. And that is what I really appreciated, that a lot of those first round matchups, or at least first weekend matchups, were really close. And I think that is really showing us the parity in women's basketball, that it's not a foregone conclusion that lower seeds are not going to be competitive against higher seeds in the first couple of rounds. Like, they're going to bring their A game, and they made it really close for a few teams.
Yeah, I mean, even when you think about, the teams that you maybe anticipated to go ahead and blow out certain teams, didn't do that. I mean, you look at the last game that's on the tip of my memory right now, Iowa and West Virginia. That game was a lot closer than I think a lot of people anticipate. I mean, Caitlin Clark's last game at home. She'll never come back to that arena as a college student. She'll be a professional. So it's very, sentimental. It's nostalgic, all of that. But West Virginia said, you know what? We don't care about any of that. We're attempting to spoil this for you. And they got close. I was like, girl, this may not be.
West Virginia is not, they were not scrubs. And I don't know who would have thought that they would have been. But even going to the Iowa State-Stanford matchup, instant classic. Instant classic. Overtime matchup. Seeing Audi Crooks and Cameron Brink cancel each other out, bringing it down to, other players needing to step up. Emily Ryan, this went off. Kiki Iriefin went off for Stanford, 42 points, I believe, or over 40 points. It was like, those are the kinds of moments that we look forward to in March. And it was great to see that, to see games that close and that tight. I love that. I love that for us. And I love the way that women's basketball is trending, where we're getting more of that. So we don't really care that people aren't upset when we're on the edge of our seat thinking oh my God, how's this going to end?
I mean, in all fairness, like you said, so many good games, so many close games, which I feel like is more exciting than upsets. I mean, don't get me wrong. Upsets are great, but an upset that's a blowout is kind of like, eh. I mean, for example, South Carolina UNC, not a good game. It was, and I'm a UNC girl through and through, both men and women.
I know.
And I went in there thinking okay, we did our bracket last pod, and I said, South Carolina is going to advance. I thought it was going to be a little bit more intense for them in terms of competition. That score was 60-19 or something like that at the half, and I said, yeah, it's not going to work out for us.
Now they're in a different league.
It's not going to be able to do it. But during, the first few rounds rather, the conversation's kind of been had on X, formerly known as Twitter. I can't believe I just referred to it as X. I guess I have to.
Twitter forever.
It's Twitter forever, right? A lot of WNBA players and former WNBA players were sharing their thoughts. Crystal Laghorn was one of them, who basically said, I think that it might be time for the first two rounds to be played on neutral sites. We did see, South Carolina was playing at home. Iowa was playing at home. I mean, the list goes on and on. Do you agree with this sentiment?
I'm on the fence. I'm on the fence for a couple of reasons. So pro neutral site, the game is growing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that because the game is growing, it is time for us to consider what that evolution would look like from a standpoint of giving us more. So neutral sites gives everyone the opportunity to travel. It gives everyone, the opportunity to, see what their fan base is, how their fan base is going to support. It gives everyone, quote unquote, an equal playing field, I guess, right? So I get that. I get that understanding. Con, neutral site. I don't want to see the value of winning your conference, having a tough schedule, being like one of the top teams in your conference. I don't want to see that diminished. And for me, that's part of one of the reasons why you work so hard in the regular season and in the conference tournament, so that you can host, so that you can be the one to host and not. And I think that's fair and deserved. I also like the fact, like, let's not be, coy here. These schools get paid. Like, these programs get money for hosting at their schools. And I know, it's not like they necessarily like, oh, we're feeding this team a lot of money, or the school that already makes money more money. But I mean, for these particular programs, like, I feel like it's great to have people travel, come build a camaraderie and a connection with that institution. And we don't get to see things like Caitlin Clark playing her last game in Carter Hawkeye Arena. So I'm kind of, and let's just also make sure we note that a lot of this neutral site conversation is circling around the fairness of whether or not people are calling the game fair. And it don't matter what site you're playing at. We need better officiating. Like, the officiating in some of those matchups were real questionable. And I was thinking to myself, are these WNBA officials? Because there's a lot of stuff looking real familiar right here.
For sure. I mean, you bring up two very good points. I mean, we see in professional sports all the time, which is what collegiate sports are kind of starting to model more and more themselves after, especially with NIL and being able to make money off your, name, image, and likeness, which is very much something you're able to do in professional leagues. Home court advantage is very much a thing. Home court advantage is very much a thing in the playoffs, in the finals, in the Super Bowl, in the playoffs, in the NFL. I mean, that's what you work so hard, to your point, during the regular season for, so that you can play in front of your home crowd. You can play in front of, your family. You can play on a site that you're very much used to playing for half of the season. The court, the ins and outs. And there have been a lot of statistics that have shown that home court advantage is a very real thing. So to your point, I actually don't have an issue with that. And if it is, a referee or an officiating thing, let's be honest, ever since sports betting and gambling has become a thing, and we broke this down on the Beyond the Arc podcast the other day, anytime a ref makes a call, you're always looking at him crazy or her crazy, especially if it's a game deciding call. You're always kind of wondering who's, quote unquote, on the books, who's not, who has favoritism. I don't think that goes away if you put it on a neutral site. I just think that you're on a neutral site with a ref who wants a certain team to win, maybe. I just think it happens that way.
I don't know. I don't know if I would go so far as to say like the refs are like dirty in that way.
Yeah, of course. Then I'm just being
right. But I mean, but there are some
biases.
adjustments. Yeah, there are some biases, and there are some adjustments that need to be made as it relates to officiating. And I think that needs to be the first thing that's addressed.
Right.
Where you play doesn't matter, to your point, if the refs are still going to be officiating in a way that is not conducive to the style of play that we're seeing. So that's what you need to fix. We can worry about neutral sites as the game continues to grow, as the money continues to come in, because we know it's coming in. So we're definitely not about to go that way and say, well, y'all not making money. No, the women's tournament is making money. But
and I don't think that neutral sites, I mean, fan bases travel. College fan bases are fanatical.
Yeah.
A lot of these schools, this is their best team that they have. Some of these are not big football programs, so it's not like they're big football schools. So their basketball teams are everything. They'll travel. Refs tend to be influenced by the crowd. So I don't know if it may change the amount of people that they're influenced by, the cheers and the roars or the boos, whatever the case may be. It may be a little bit more even down the split when it comes to, which side the fans are for. But I don't know if that changes a lot of the factors that sometimes influence refs in their decision making.
Yeah, no, I agree. Just let's worry about the officiating. We'll get to neutral sites at some point. I think at some point it will make sense. I'm just not convinced that it's right now.
All right. Well, listen, coming up, we will look forward to the Sweet 16 and potential Elite 8 matchups that we will see in Albany. We'll be right back.
It's time for a little all-star college basketball.
It's the Reese's College All-Star Game, April 5th on CBS Sports Network.
Welcome back, everybody. Ashley here, Terrika here, and we are going to discuss, or rather, we need to discuss the Albany region. And yes, that includes the bracket of death that is surprisingly still very chalky. Now, let's get into it. First of all, our bracket, if you guys, used our bracket to go ahead and make your bracket, we apologize in advance. In all fairness, Terrika did warn you.
So we did, but we got a lot of them right, though. We got a lot of them right.
We did. Obviously, Louisville kind of screwed a lot of people. That is not our fault. Please don't hold us accountable. Disclaimer at the bottom of the pod. So listen, we were talking about this region. It's safe to say that we're getting the Iowa LSU rematch in the Elite Eight, or is it safe to assume that?
That's a great question. I don't know if it's 100% safe. I feel like the matchup that we saw against West Virginia and Iowa led us to believe that Iowa can be a bit vulnerable. Caitlin Clark is phenomenal. 32 points were necessary, but I think that's just it. They needed her to score 32 points in order to win that game. The defense from West Virginia was stiff. Like, they weren't giving up much. This team won with 64 points. And I don't know how many teams you can say can hold Iowa to 64 points. They're one of the top 3 scoring offenses in the nation. So I think that it led us to some questions that won't easily be answered as they're looking to face Colorado. Colorado is another team that's very balanced. They've got 2 amazing scorers and players on their team in Jalen Sherrod and Aaronette Vonleh. And Vonleh is a 6'3" center that's going to bring it, right? And so the one thing that I'm curious to see is whether or not Hannah Stalky, who's their premier post player for Iowa, is going to be able to step up. Now, kudos to her. She dropped a double-double against West Virginia, and it was necessary. But I think the main point that makes me nervous about whether or not Iowa is going to get to the Elite Eight is if they are going to be consistent offensively and help Caitlin. I have no doubt Caitlin going to drop like 30, 40 on them. Right. I have no doubt about that. But who's going to help her? Like, who is going to be the person to help her? That's the question. I don't have an answer for that. So until I can have a consistent answer for that, I can't automatically write Iowa into the Elite Eight. We will have to see what happens. And Colorado going to have a chip on their shoulder. Because Colorado out last year? Iowa.
Yes.
So
I mean,
it's a bit of an issue.
It's definitely interesting if you use the West Virginia game as kind of, the gauge for potentially how the rest of Iowa's matchups will go. I mean, obviously West Virginia outscored them by 4 in the second quarter, and then tied them in points in the fourth quarter. But if you look at it, one of the things that stood out to me is in the second quarter, they held Caitlin Clark to, I think, under 6 points in that quarter, and also completely removed Gabby Marshall from the game. I mean, she was not a factor, at least offensively speaking. Defensively, she went ahead and she was able to make some things happen, but completely removed her from the game. She had 0 points, for anyone who's unsure what that means. 0, not a single one. So it is interesting how defensively, just on attack mode, West Virginia was. And I wonder if other teams are watching that and saying, okay, now we know how to beat this team. Caitlin Clark in Iowa, it sounds good on paper. It sounds like a Cinderella story. It would be magical, but West Virginia just kind of gave you the blueprint on how to go ahead and hit them where it hurts.
Yeah, I think that Iowa has had that. I think that teams that provide a very strong press coverage or press defense are the teams that Iowa struggled with earlier this year. They did that against Kansas State, in which they ended up losing one of those matchups. They did it against Penn State. Now, they ended up winning both of those against Penn State, the second one being a blowout. But to Iowa's credit, they also stepped up defensively, which was one of the reasons why I really enjoyed this matchup, because they are not a team that is known for their defense, but it was understood that in order for them to really try to put pressure on West Virginia, they were going to have to step it up to a next level defensive effort. And they did that. And I got to give them love and credit for that. Because that showed us that they know how to adjust and approach the game differently in order to secure a win. That's important. But again, depth is also going to be important. And when you're not getting points from Gabby Marshall, when you're not getting a strong offensive effort from Kate Martin, and you only have to rely on Caitlin Clark. And that has been my criticism the entire year about Iowa. Like, it is not that they're not good or not talented, because they absolutely are. And it really ain't even been about Caitlin, because
they're top heavy.
No denying, right? There's no denying what Caitlin is and what Caitlin can do. My criticism has only and always been who's going to help her, because as you get through the tournament, you cannot do it alone. You need help. So that's it.
That's absolutely the fact. I mean, across all sports, especially like going back to the comparisons between professional, we see that all the time when a team is top heavy. And usually in the NBA, for example, it's one or two guys, the stars on the team, and the rest of the team is just very empty. We've seen that formula not work 9 out of 10 times. We saw it with the Brooklyn Nets. We're seeing it with the Phoenix Suns. I mean, the list goes on and on. When you are top heavy and you're heavily reliant on one guy or two guys, it's not really how you go ahead and win the hardware. So, I mean, this might be a ridiculous question for South Carolina, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Iowa, LSU, there may be more of an answer there, but is there anybody you think that can kind of derail South Carolina, Iowa, or LSU, whoever comes out of, that potential matchup, from getting to Cleveland? I mean, South Carolina, again, might be a little bit of a ridiculous question, but anything is possible.
Yeah, I don't think it's ridiculous to ask that question, because any good team can have a bad game. The problem is we ain't seen South Carolina have a bad game all season. Like, even when we think like this is a bad game or this isn't them playing to their characteristics, they find a way to win. And like, that's what makes teams so good, is if you can find a way to win even when you're playing outside of yourself. So I don't see a team knocking off South Carolina. I can't fathom it at this point, but they are not invincible. No team in a tournament style is invincible, because every team can have an off shooting night. Any team can, it can come down to that one play. We saw it with South Carolina and Tennessee. They left Camilla open thinking, oh, she's not a 3-point shooter, and sis hit the shot to win the game. So anything can happen, and anything can happen. But I don't see a team derailing South Carolina because they're better. It just, something will happen that South Carolina will get in their own way if that happens. Iowa, LSU, I think both teams are vulnerable enough, or let me not say vulnerable. I think both Colorado and UCLA are good enough to win. So it really isn't about Iowa and LSU, although I think LSU was playing great. I think LSU has an offense and defensive balance. I think they're, again, one of the top offensive teams in the country. LSU is they're rolling, and they're rolling at the right time. But I don't want to sleep on UCLA, because they've got Lauren Betts back now, who's certainly going to hold down the middle. We all know what Charisma Osborne and Kiki Rice can do.
Yes.
So, and Corey Close is a great coach. She's been in these positions before. She knows how to coach her girls through it. They just got to execute, right? So I'm not about to sleep on Colorado or UCLA being capable of defeating Iowa and LSU. So that's how I will answer that question. South Carolina, no, but Iowa and LSU, they got to show up in the Sweet 16 for real, because they are facing teams who are capable of winning.
And I think it's fair to say that in comparison to South Carolina, Iowa and LSU might have a little bit more of potential weak spots where teams can kind of go ahead and pounce on. Not to say that South Carolina doesn't, but if they do, they have a very good way of hiding them, because I haven't seen them.
So, I love it. I can't wait for this LSU UCLA matchup. Honestly, I'm more excited for that than any other matchup this weekend.
Listen, we will get into the Kim Mulkey press conference or warning another time, because that was also something that took over Twitter. I said, "Girl, what's
if
coming
Kim
down?"
Don't sit down, Kim, sit down.
I said, what is coming down? You seem very upset.
It's so drama filled. Sit down, Kim.
Girl, I've never been so invested in the Washington Post in my life. So
I'm sitting here waiting for. I'm waiting for this article, like
a Beyonce album. I'm like, where's the drop?
Where's the link?
What is she concerned about? Listen, we're gonna take a quick break, but when we get back, we're headed to Portland for that side of the bracket. We'll be right back.
It's time for the madness.
And CBS Sports HQ has your wall-to-wall NCAA tournament coverage. We got your game highlights, expert analysis, and insights all the way to the Final Four. Start and end your March Madness coverage with CBS Sports HQ.
2, 1.
Welcome back, everybody. Ashley here, Terrika here, and as promised, it is time for the Portland side of the bracket. And yes, it is still chalky, but there are some intriguing potential storylines that we're going to dive into. So, would you say, though, that I feel like the Portland side of the bracket is probably the most likely side to not send a number 1 seed to Cleveland? Do you think that's fair, or do you feel like that's, I don't know?
Well, you know what? I think that that's fair because I think that I do not have a number 1 seed coming out of one of those sides.
Really? So no USC, no Texas.
No, not a number 1. Yeah. So one side of the Portland region, I do not have. I do not have no Texas, I think. I'm going to say because I know we're going to pick our Final Four again later in the show, but I think that these two regions are interesting from a seeding perspective. I love USC. I love everything about them and what they've been doing. Texas, I feel like, has been so under the radar, and I couldn't be more proud of Texas. Sure. Like, I think so many people looked at them and thought their season was going to be done. When we talk about Rory Harmon being out for the rest of the season, but I mean, the Aaliyah Moore, Madison Booker, everybody has stepped up to next level play. And I love that for Tennessee. So, I love that for Texas. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say Tennessee. But I look at this side of the bracket and I think like there are still some dark horses that are there. Like, I was surprised that Gonzaga beat Utah. I was surprised at that. But they're no stranger to being in this position. NC State is not a game, y'all. Like, NC State has come to ball. Like, they are to be feared. And if I'm Stanford, looking at how close they played against Iowa State, they better be careful. And Cameron Brink needs to make sure she stays out of foul trouble so she can be a factor, because that's huge for them. They definitely can present someone other than a 1 seed to the Final Four. The capability is there.
I mean, it's definitely interesting. We're talking about a team that knows a thing or two about Final Fours, the UConn Huskies. I mean, 2 wins away from another Final Four on their record book when it comes to the Huskies. I mean, how likely is it that they're going to make their way all the way to Cleveland? Obviously, they've been dealing with a lot of injuries and they've been powering through despite that. So that's a testament of a really good team that, that is not something that's been a factor for them, at least in the grand scheme of winning games. Obviously, it's a factor when how you're winning them or the intensity in which you're winning them or the way in which you're winning them. But a win is a win. And in this tournament, a win is a win. It counts. It's one and done. And you just want to be on the good side of that, not the bad side of that. So, I mean, can they make their way back?
I am old enough to remember when I'm old enough to remember when it was almost a foregone conclusion that UConn was going to the Final Four. I mean, it's been that kind of a program. 22 total Final Four, 6 perfect seasons. Insane. Like, it's just like, it was almost a foregone conclusion that this was going to be a team to make it. But they haven't been to the championship since 2022, which feels crazy, but it was literally 2022.
Which is really not that long ago. In basketball years,
isn't that long ago. But in basketball years, it feels like forever because we're like, where's UConn?
Right.
I have said all year that I think that this UConn team it just feels different. It started off a little slower than I think people realize. Paige Beckers got reacclimated to being back on the court, as we know that she was out last year. They lost AZ Futta again for another year. Aaliyah Edwards stepped up her game tremendously. We know Aaliyah probably gonna be a lottery pick in the draft, so that's cool. It just feels like this team didn't get as much conversation, which in some ways I know people are happy about that because they were probably tired of talking about UConn. But at the same time, I think it worked. Yeah, I'm sure people were like, I'm happy we ain't talking about UConn right now. But at the same time, I feel like that worked for them because they were able to kind of fly under the radar here later on in the season. They played incredibly well. They got some big performances out of Paige Beckers here lately. I mean, she's in the player of the year conversation
for sure.
And in my mind, I'm just thinking this is a team that can really sneak their way in the Final Four. And while no one would be surprised, I feel like everyone would be surprised. Like, we didn't talk about y'all. We didn't see y'all being this team that could be here. So can they make it to the Final Four? Absolutely they can. Now they got to go through a couple of other teams to get there. They've got to see Duke, which is a very hot team right now. I still can't believe that they beat Ohio State after starting the game on an 11-minute scoring
round. It pains me, but go ahead.
Oh my God. I was like, what, Duke? Y'all really pulled this out? And see, the Michigan State in me is like, thank you for knocking off Ohio State. But anyway, but at the same time, that you got to get through Duke. They got to get through USC. It would be so fun to see a Paige Beckers, JuJu Watkins, Elite Eight. I think that would be so dope. But it's not going to be an easy road. It really won't be. But it has certainly been fun to watch a team that is probably one of the marquee programs of women basketball kind of fly under the radar a little bit.
You mentioned, flying under the radar, and the name that you mentioned, JuJu Watkins, is not doing that by any means. She is very much on the radar, very much on the spotlight, rather. And there's just been so much just intensity surrounding her in the best way possible. I mean, she is a total rock star at just 18 years old. I mean, she leaves the game and there is a crowd of people outside waiting for her just for a photo, a conversation, an autograph, you name it. Absolutely love it. I don't know if you saw Joelle Embiid rocking her bun. She looks good with the JuJu bun. I thought I was gonna not like it. She should think about rocking it next season. It's kind of working for him. But they're obviously with heavy is the head that wears the crown, and JuJu has already kind of been deemed the next face of women's college basketball, and with that comes certain expectations. But I wonder if the expectations for her may be a little bit too high at this early in her career. I wonder if she doesn't make a Final Four with USC, with everything that surrounds her, the star power that surrounds her, are people who will be disappointed by that because they say she's the next face of the league, she should be there. Are they putting too much on her too soon when she is just now figuring it out?
Yeah, I don't think that there should be an expectation for USC to make the Final Four. They weren't expected to win their conference, and they did. They weren't expected to be a number one seed, and they are. So I don't know if there's a true expectation for them to make the Final Four. I think there are more people who probably will think that UConn can come out of, like, now that they are where they are, despite everything that I just said, I think more people would be less surprised if UConn made the Final Four than if USC did, although they're very good, very capable, and JuJu Watkins has just been a star. She's 18. She's helped lead this team with a very strong supporting cast. I don't think that there should be an expectation for her. She's already done more than people probably would have given her credit for. The way that she has scored this season, the records that she's broken, she's also in the Player of the Year conversation, rightfully so. She's gotten USC back to the Sweet 16, a place they haven't been in 30 years. She's broken Lisa Leslie's record. Like, she has done so much already that there's no way you can throw any type of disappointment on what she accomplished in her first year. This is an 18-year-old girl who won't be 19 until July, and she's already done so much. And what I love about her, Ash, is that she is so humble. Like, she's so humble. She's just like,
oh my God.
I'm so thankful. I appreciate my team. You know what I mean? Because it is a team effort. And that's like what I love the most is that her team supports her. They back her up. They give her the ability to be the kind of beast that she is on the court. And they support that on the court and off the court. I just don't know if it is fair to put an expectation on her to make the Final Four. But if she doesn't make the Final Four, if USC doesn't make the Final Four, there's no way you can look at this team and say this is a disappointment. Like,
and again,
I get excited about next season.
I just gotta give JuJu her flowers because I know at 18 years old, and Terrika, I know you can say the same. I was a hot mess at 18.
Girl, like, I was living in Miami at 18. Don't ask me.
At 18, I was not, being a polished superstar in the making. I was a hot mess, probably skipping way too many classes during my senior year of high school and saying whatever happens, happens.
I was a freshman in college at 18. I was a student athlete, but I was absolutely on the bench. Like, I was not starting my freshman year. I was on the bench.
Yeah, JuJu, be better than us. You already are.
You already are.
You're good, girl. Whatever happens from here, you are tears ahead of than most of us. Because what a time 2011 was.
What a time.
Okay, our last point of the show today. I mean, we're going to talk Final Four. Obviously, anything can happen and anything can change. But right now, let's say in a perfect world, whatever you predict is going to come true. What does that Final Four look like for you?
I have South Carolina coming out of Albany 1. Yes. I've got LSU coming out of Albany 2. I have Stanford coming out of Albany 3. Same. But I certainly would not be surprised if it was NC State. But I still have Stanford coming out of Portland 1. And then I have USC coming out of Portland 2.
Okay. So we were talking, obviously, Duke being intense and UConn, one of those teams are going to come out of that matchup. Duke, UConn. Would you have UConn or would you have Duke coming out that to face USC?
I have UConn. I have a UConn USC matchup, and I have UConn and USC with USC winning by a thin thread. Like, I think that's going to be a close game, like down to the wire.
So no faith in the UConn championship DNA to rear its powerful head and say, we ain't going down like that. Not against USC. This is
one of those moments where I am okay being wrong. Like, I am totally fine being wrong. Like, I live in Connecticut. UConn Husky Nation, do not come for me, okay? Like, I'm saying, y'all can do it. I just didn't. Who knows? Okay, wow.
Listen, but the great thing about this podcast is more than likely we might be wrong. So when we revisit this next week, we may be having a drastically different conversation. So UConn, pump your brakes if you want to go ahead and find Terrika. Just give her one more week. She may come back to your side.
They will come to me in the grocery store, Ashley, and be like, "Oh, so you didn't pick Connecticut?"
Yikes!
Sorry.
Listen, that's terrifying. Connecticut, we got to get better hobbies, y'all. We got to get better hobbies. Go outside, ride a bike. The weather's getting warm. Let's do it. Listen, guys, that does it for us here this week. We will be back next week. Please remember to comment, like, subscribe, share with whoever you have in your life who is a college basketball fan, or whoever you have in your life who's becoming a women's college basketball fan. And make sure you guys subscribe to the CBS College Basketball YouTube channel. Until next week, Ashley and Terrika, we're out.
See ya.